Hello everyone, my name's Honza, and welcome back to the journey through Norse mythology. Now, following the previous episode where we discovered how Odin learned the runes and in relation 18 runic spells, today we will actually take a look at what those 18 spells are, what they do, and what is their significance. Quite an interesting thing we learn is that many of these spells aren't at all magical abilities, but rather very human traits, skills, and attributes. However, that doesn't make them any less powerful, as you will see for yourself. With that out of the way, let's hear the words of Odin, which will guide us throughout this video. Quote, "I know magic spells that no woman knows, and no man either. The first is called help, and it will help you in lawsuits and sadness, and all kinds of worries." End quote. Right from the start, we can see how these spells and charms that Odin learned are not all necessarily some arcane powers. With this first spell, if it can be even called that, Odin points out that power within receiving aid and kindness from friends and loved ones. After all, what is a man without friends that have his back, or without a family that provides and cares for him, even in his most dire times? No matter who you are, you need friends in your life. You need someone who will lend you a hand when you need it. Never underestimate the power of friendship and the care of others. It might seem strange to hear such ideas come from such a inherently violent and warlike society that it was in Scandinavia during the Viking Age, but you would be surprised at how passionate and heartfelt Norse poems can be. The poem I use today for quotes about the spells Odin learned is also filled with a great deal of talk about friendship and how important it is in one's life, as well as many advices and life lessons overall, and many of them still hold merit to this day. That only shows us just how inherently human at heart the Norse society in the Viking Age was. But that could be a subject of another video. Let me know in the comments below if you would be interested in a video about Odin's proverbs and life lessons. Anyway, I've got a little carried away there. Let's continue with the second spell. Quote, "I know a second spell which men need if they want to heal each other." End quote. The nature of this spell is quite self-explanatory. A straightforward explanation can give us an alternate translation of this part, linking this spell directly with physical healing. Let's quote, "A second I know that men shall need, who leechcraft long to use." End quote. For those who don't know, in medieval times the so-called leeching was a common medical practice performed by physicians. It was basically putting leeches on various limbs to draw out your blood. This procedure was used to treat injuries, diseases, and even if you were completely fine, getting leeched from time to time was still considered healthy, and so the term leechcraft was simply synonymous with medical practice. This quite clearly tells us that this spell was meant for healing of others in a medical sense, and not in perhaps psychological soothing sense that might come to mind given the nature of the first spell. Let's move on to the third. Quote, "I know a third spell. If I have a great need to thwart my enemies, I dull the edges of their weapons, and none of their blades will bite." End quote. Once again, this quote-unquote spell seems much more like a real-life clever tactic rather than an arcane power. However, even if Odin uses magic to accomplish this task, or if he uses his wit, skills, and trickery, the outcome of it remains the same. That is, that the weapons of his enemies are rendered useless, and whatever they strive to achieve is foiled before it even started. Let's move on to the fourth spell. Quote, "I know a fourth spell. If chains and locks are placed upon my limbs, I cast this spell so I can escape. The chains burst from my hands, the locks burst from my feet." End quote. This spell is the first one that comes close to something we could actually call magic. Basically, whenever Odin finds himself captured and chained or otherwise restrained, he can simply cast this spell, and his binds will quickly and, quite literally, burst from his limbs. Even though there are performing magicians who can unlock handcuffs and wiggle out of straitjackets, I doubt any of them could make their feathers burst from their bodies, so I think we'll keep this in mind as one of the inherently magical powers Odin possesses. Now let's move on to the 5th spell. Quote, I know a 5th spell. If I see a spear cast into a crowd of battling foes, it cannot fly so fast that I can't change its course, as long as I can see it. End quote. Now we are finally getting into some more inherently magical abilities. This spell is probably linked with the favorite warriors of Odin, whom he watches over in battle and personally seeks to make sure they come to no harm. The last line, as long as I can see it, nicely showcases that even though Odin is a god above all other gods, wielding powers and sorceries that even other of his kind could only dream of, he still doesn't claim to be omnipotent, or that he is always watching everyone at all times. This is just many of his attributes that make him so fundamentally human in nature. Now let's move on to the 6th spell. Quote, I know a 6th spell. If a man carves a curse against me in runes on the root of a tree, I call the spell down upon that man, and his curse harms him instead of me. End quote. Receiving a root carved with a runic curse was thought to be lethal, and so this spell is therefore used purely for protection, as it allows Odin to counter any curses carved in runes against him. Now, casting curses in runes against someone who mastered them seems pretty foolish. However, we have to remember that it is very rarely that Odin travels around without a disguise or without a false name, and so anyone who might get tricked by him could very well cast a curse in an attempt to get revenge on him. However, this spell tells us just how unhealthy that action would be. Now let's see the 7th spell. Quote, I know a 7th spell. If I see a great flame consuming a hall full of people, it cannot burn so bright that I cannot save those inside. I know how to cast this spell. End quote. This spell seems to offer Odin some elemental protection against fire, for when he casts this spell, no matter how great and hot the flame, it will not hurt him. Not much else I can say to it than that. Now on to the 8th spell. Quote, I know an 8th spell. It would be useful for anyone to learn it. When hate arises between any two people, I can cool their tempers. End quote. This may seem as a pretty pathetic spell at first glance, but really think about it for a second. How helpful is it to be able to calm down people in the heat of an argument? This is not just about tearing two people away from each other, but actually calming the two down to such a degree that they are willing to cease their dispute. Now think how incredibly useful it is to be able to calm two people who are in a heated disagreement about something. This doesn't concern just two friends disagreeing about what movie they want to watch, but any two people who might be in an argument about something. Let's say you have two brothers who are in a dispute about inheriting their father's kingdom, or what about two nations in a dispute over territory? Even any war, no matter how grand and drawn out, always ends the same way, with people from both sides sitting down and talking to each other, whether to discuss the terms of peace or surrender. Now, think how insanely useful would it be if you could calm both sides before any conflict started. This can lead to both sides cooling down and discussing a possible compromise that would save many lives in the process. Some of the worst decisions are done when you are rash and hot-headed, and being able to calm down and look at the issue one more time with cool temper can make a hell of a difference. This spell might actually be one of the most powerful Odin has at his disposal. Now let's check the 9th. Quote, I know a 9th spell. If the need arises for me to save a ship upon the sea, I can calm the wind upon the waves and soothe the sea to sleep. End quote. This is again one of the inherently arcane powers from the Runic Spells that Odin learned. I think it's pretty straightforward. I have nothing to add. Let's move on to the 10th spell. Quote, I know a 10th spell. If I see witches at play in the air, I can cast this spell so that they get lost, so they can't find their skins, so they can find their minds. End quote. This spell Odin uses directly to punish the magic users that delve into the art of shapeshifting. If he comes upon any witches transformed into hideous beasts and alike, he casts this spell so they forget who they truly were before their transformation, and so they remain in their form of feral beasts permanently, oblivious to their previous nature. Let's see the 11th spell. Quote, I know an 11th spell. If I lead old friends into battle, I enchant their shields so that they will have the victory. They will go to battle unharmed and return from battle unharmed. They will come home without harm. End quote. Once more, a very straightforward spell. Upon casting it, Odin puts charms over the equipment of his companions or champions, which ensures that they come to no harm in battle nor on their way home. Let's move on to the 12th spell. Quote, I know a 12th spell. If I see, hanging from a tree, a dead man's corpse, I carve some runes and paint them, and then that corpse will walk and speak with me. End quote. This is probably the most often used spell at Odin's disposal, for you see, there are several milestones in Odin's search for wisdom, most notably the gain of the mead of poetry, the discovery of the runes, and the sip he received from the Well of Wisdom, a tale which we'll discuss in the next video. However, these are not the only sources of the wisdom and knowledge Odin possesses, as he quite frequently seeks out the knowledge of the dead. He searches for the graves of the greatest warriors, wisest sages, and most powerful sorcerers, and from them he learns their skill and age-old wisdoms, for who could best possess better experience than someone who spent their whole life improving their skill? Furthermore, Odin also inquires of them the knowledge of the grave, for the dead possess insight of the mysteries of the universe and secrets of both life and death that the living could never hope to grasp. And also, on more than one occasion, Odin seeks out dead seeresses and he asks them for their knowledge of the future in an effort of altering it. However, we've already discussed the concept of fate in Norse mythology, and so we know that even for a god, trying to change destiny is a futile task. Now on to the 13th spell. Quote, I know a 13th spell. If I sprinkle water upon a newborn boy, he will never be killed, even if he goes into battle. That man will not die from violence. End quote. The custom of sprinkling water upon a newborn child was a tradition between the Germanic peoples long before the concept of baptism was established in Christianity, and it would seem that if it was done by a god, or at least by Odin, the child would be shielded from any hurt done by violence. Even though this may seem as a blessing to us, to a man within the warlike Norse society, not being able to find a glorious death in battle might have been seen more as a curse than a blessing. Let's read about the 14th spell. Quote, I know a 14th spell. It allows me to count all the gods for men. I know the names of all the gods and elves, and few who are fools can say that. End quote. This, even though not of arcane might, is still a very useful spell to have. Taking in mind other translation of this poem, we could express the middle part of this stanza as, quote, If I were to name the mighty gods and elves, I know them all well, and only fools would claim the same. End quote. This shows us not just the wisdom, but the relationship Odin holds to his fellow gods and elves, for to know them all is truly a worthy deed. It also shows us once more how tight the relations are between gods and elves, as Odin speaks of them as fondly as of his own kin. Well, let's jump to the 15th spell. Quote, I know a 15th spell. The dwarf Reupload cast it upon Delling's door. He conjured power for the gods and courage for the elves. They knew Odin. End quote. This is the part of the video when I tell you we know jack shit about what is said here. No joke, I'm afraid. As I've told you before, our knowledge of Norse mythology is far from satisfactory, and many, if not most, of its lore is lost to the ages. This spell talks about a dwarf named Reupload, a character not mentioned anywhere else in the sources we have, and without at least an idea or a basic indication as to the nature of this character, we have no idea what kind of spell would he be casting on Delling's door, or why. Furthermore, even Delling is an enigma, and there is just about a pair of mentions about who he is. From what we know, Delling is the husband of Not, and with her he had a son named Day. And now, with this information, try piecing together the meaning of this spell. Yeah, you see my point. I'm afraid the nature of this spell will remain a mystery forever, unless any new sources on the Norse myths will be discovered in the future, which unfortunately seems very unlikely. Now, because the 16th and 17th spell convey pretty much the same meaning, I will read them together. Quote, I know a 16th spell. If I want to win over a cunning woman, and have her all to myself, I can change the mind of that lovely beauty, and win her favor for myself. I know a 17th spell, to prevent the beautiful woman from shunning me. End quote. These spells tell us of yet another quality of Odin that he learned thanks to the runes, and that is his charm. It is easy to picture Odin, from his depictions in the both modern-day media and even old illustrations, as some grumpy old man filled with bitterness and wisdom. And even though that is to some extent true, in the Norse myths, Odin is still lively, even in his old age, and quite a ladies' man to say the least. There is a good number of accounts of Odin seducing women for his own goals, as we've seen in the story about the mead of poetry, for example, or, well, to just have a good time. Odin has many children outside of his marriage to Freya, most notably Thor, who he conceived with a giantess named Jord, also known by a whole variety of other names depending on the source you look at. However, her name, Jord, as well as her other names, all mean the same, that is, Earth. So she was most likely thought of as a goddess or a spirit of Midgard itself. This is no doubt the reason why Thor is such a valiant protector of the realm of men. Furthermore, the 17th spell concludes with the following verses. Quote, Reupload, all these spells would be useful to you all your life. They would profit if you learned them. They'd do you good if you remembered them. They'd suit your needs if you could use them. End quote. However, as with the 15th spell, the rest of this one remains a mystery to us. We have no idea who this Reupload could be, nor why would Odin reveal to him and presumably teach him the runic spells he learned, and so this is yet another passage that will most likely remain without explanation. Lastly, however, there is the 18th spell, easily the most obscure and mysterious of all. Quote, I know an 18th spell, which I will never teach to a girl or a woman, unless maybe to the one I call my wife or my sister. It is much better that one alone should know this, which is the last of the spells. End quote. This is as cryptic of a description as you could possibly get. With the 18th spell, Odin presumably received some knowledge so troubling and so sinister that he deemed it best if only he should be the one to bear it. This information is so ominous that Odin's wife is the only one he trusts enough to share with the burden of this knowledge. As to his sister, well, Odin has no sister. This presumably means that Odin wouldn't trust even his family with this secret, since the only one else he would share this with is a non-existent family member. And as to what this secret actually is, we don't know. This is a secret that is so worrying and menacing that Odin decided it would be better if he never revealed it to anyone, except his wife, presumably. So what could it be? What could be this knowledge that is better to keep hidden, better to never tell anyone, better to never unveil? And with that brain teaser, I will end this video, once more with the words of Odin. Quote, "Now the words of the One-Eyed are heard in Valhalla, for the benefit of humans, for the harm of giants. Health to you who speak them, health to you who know them, joy to you who learn them, health to you who hear them." End quote. And this would be all for today, and I bid you all farewell until next time.